Thanks for finding Discovery class. During the summer months, I'm looking at personalities in the Bible. Have you ever heard of the term zealot? Do you know what it means? It means fanatic. Somebody that's unreasonably enthusiastic. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, it's a person with very extreme beliefs. A person who behaves in an unreasonably or violent way. That's a zealot. When Jesus chose his 12 disciples, I find that there's little or nothing that's said about them. One of the 12, of whom we hardly know anything about, he's the one that I want to talk about today. His name is Simon. Now, there were two Simons among the 12. You know the other Simon. He was the fisherman. His name was Simon too. Well, this guy, his name is also Simon, but he was called Simon the Zealot. Number 11 on the list of 12 and rather obscure. He's called Simon the Canaanite. Well, he's also had a nickname. And the nickname is what they called Simon the Zealot, or Zelotes, Luke 6:15. He got that name because he belonged to a political party called the Zealots. They were a group of Jews who believed in national freedom for the nation of Israel. And they hated Rome, their dictator occupiers under Caesar. Their motto was quite simple: no compromise with Rome. They hated Rome, and they were out to put Rome down. This party, it came into existence about 20 years before the ministry of Jesus started. And it gathered momentum and force after Jesus' death. So much so that its strength became so powerful that historians think they were reason, those zealots, they were really the cause for the overflow of the city of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. And Rome wanted to make an example of them, and they took them out. And they did it by destroying the city. Historians think also that this fanaticism against Jerusalem was really 40 years after the death of Jesus. So Simon the Zealot, or the Zelotes, was a member of this party. He was also a member becoming an apostle for Jesus. No doubt that's why they nicknamed him Simon the Zealot, because of his background. He was originally one of a band of freedom fighters, rebel patriots who were zealous to free Israel from Roman tyranny. And our present world today is still full of freedom fighters. All you have to do is listen to your news or read your newspaper, or look around you and you'll find that countries like Hungary, the Ukraine, Poland, Greece, Turkey, Syria, Iran, Cuba, North Korea, Central America, South America, all the African countries, I could go on and on. Nations ferment, and they seek freedom. And many of them seek a dictatorship. China has. So in Israel, during the time of Jesus, there were men zealous for their country who wanted national, political, and religious independence. Well, that's basically all we know about Simon. He was a follower. The Gospels tell us very little about him. However, on that one word, I'd like to build his character. In so doing, let's see if we can form a little bit of his personality. Simon, one day, he found himself in a crowd. He was listening to the Nazarene called Jesus. How he got in that crowd, we don't know. Why he chose to follow Jesus, we still don't know. But we think that Jesus needed a zealot, and he would become this young man's new leader. But there was something very different about Jesus' leadership that really was attractive to Simon. If you ask people today why they follow someone and what has made life rich for them, do you know that 90% of the responses, they would come down to one word? It's the word relationship. It doesn't matter who your friends are, who your spouse is, who your children are, who your grandchildren, your neighbors, your fellow workers. C.S. Lewis, he said friendship is the greatest of worldly goods. Well, I'll bet that's what Simon the Zealot found in Jesus. And that's why he followed him. Is that why you follow the Lord? I'll bet that's why you keep coming back to the class. I see you often when you come. You made friendships. And you're finding it's probably the greatest of worldly goods, just like Lewis found. Lewis went on to say further, if I had to give a piece of advice to a young man about a place to live, I think I would say this: sacrifice everything to live where you can be near where your friends live. Simon the Zealot, he learned something from being with Jesus that most of us miss. He found companionship, and it deepened his joy, it lightened his load, and it probably brightened his path. And I think that is really the secret. And it's probably your secret too. All of you know that friendship and marriages, they can dissolve. Any preacher can tell you that people can really disappoint. Judy Garland, remember her, the movie star? She was the little girl as a teenager in The Wizard of Oz following the yellow brick road. She made famous Somewhere Over the Rainbow, that beautiful song. Well, Judy Garland once told a reporter, if I'm such a legend, then why am I so lonely? Let me tell you, legends are very well, and they do very well, if you've got somebody around you who loves you. Isn't that a strong statement? Simon the Zealot, he got a ringside seat being a disciple watching Jesus as his leader. He watched him at the temple, casting out the money changers. He heard his fiery, gripping sermons, preaching. This leader was more than a prophet from Nazareth to this man Simon. Did Simon see Jesus as the Messiah? Rumors were strong in Galilee at the time that the Messiah had arrived, and every Jew knew that the coming Messiah, he was going to reign and he was going to be the new king. He would establish the throne of Israel again, and he'd bring freedom from Rome. He would be the true Messiah, and he'd be the leader of all the zealots. Well, Simon wasn't alone in that thought. I think every Israeli hoped for the Messiah. They still do, and they longed for a conqueror. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, they expected the visible overthrow of Rome. And it would be a complete revolution. Well, Simon looked for it. Even the apostles looked for it. Even after the resurrection, they asked Jesus, will you at this time restore again the kingdom of Israel? Acts 1, verse 6. I think Simon chose Jesus with the expectation of a political victory. The Jewish people would be set free, and he would be the center of that new movement, and his name would probably make headlines because he had been a zealot. And look at what he did for Jesus now. I think I see why Simon chose Jesus. And what I'm finding hard to understand, why did Jesus choose Simon? We know that Jesus deliberately chose the 12 from among the many options that he had. Why would Jesus choose a zealot from a zealot party? He was a fanatic. These are the ones who hid out in the palace of Herod after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And when the Romans built that ramp to go up and capture them, and there were over 800 of them, when they finally broke through, do you know what they found? Not one of the 800 was alive. They all committed suicide. They all had been on a common ground. They weren't going to let Rome capture them and conquer them, even in death. So, why this hot-blooded rebel? Their aim in life was the opposite of what Jesus taught. Simon wanted political victory. Jesus wanted, thy kingdom come. Thy will, God's will, be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus wanted. Jesus had no thought to overthrow Rome. Simon wanted a sword. Jesus said, put up your sword, Simon. We're not going to do this together with a sword. There's no violence. Put your sword away. Having him among the 12 was high risk. The locals in the crowd knew Simon was a zealot. Having him, I think, would put Jesus under suspicion. When you think of it, Jesus had quite a mix in his inner 12, don't you think? Simon the Zealot wanted to overthrow Rome. Matthew, the tax gatherer, who worked hand in glove with Rome, got his paycheck from Rome. So he was in Rome's pocket. These two were in Jesus' discipleship. Simon the tax hater, Matthew the tax gatherer. Would you want those two in your church? Two opposites? Hotheads? Together in one body? Think about it. Well, I think there's another reason why Jesus chose Simon. And this could be the best reason of all. Jesus wanted a zealot. He went out of his way to pick this man. He wanted a man of zeal, someone with fervor, somebody that had a personality like a bit of a fanatical devotion, eager, a man that was driven, consuming passion, a man that had a goal in line. Jesus knew that if he chose him, he could harness him, and all his unbounded enthusiasm, he could direct it in a special way for his need and for his good. Jesus knew that by choosing a freedom fighter, that he'd make a good soldier for him. And he probably would have a deep sense of loyalty to Jesus' cause. And Simon was zealous for his party. And he became zealous for the kingdom of God. Simon saw in Jesus a man who held no political campaigns. He didn't have any economic reforms in mind. He had no national revolution in mind. I don't think Simon lost his zeal. I think he found it. But he learned a new channel in which to use it. His zeal was now for the peaceful Christ. And his zeal centered on a peaceful Savior. and he gave his life for his sheep. Simon's new zeal was a love that could now enter into the hearts of men. When you look at your world today, is it any different than the world that Jesus had back when he chose his disciples? When you think of that world that we live in today, many think it's going to hell in a handcart. Along comes a bit of news that's going to renew your faith in the human condition. A recent survey has shown that most of the richest people left school at the age of 15. Kids today are tricked into thinking that a piece of parchment at the end of an entire youth spent in the classroom is the passport to a profitable life ahead. You're going to get wealthy if you get an education, in other words. But studies have found that amassing wealth is simply not a matter of academic brilliance. A survey of Britain's 30,000 millionaires tells us that most of them left school early. 2/3 of the richest Brits not only made their own fortune, but they did it going to work in their teens. Do you know what they found? What was the key to their success? Here was the common thread. They never stopped learning. They had to find out for themselves what was the secret, and work, doing chores, finding it on their own, seemed to be the secret. Never did they say, now the world owes me a living. Now that I got my degree, I'm going to be wealthy. No, they never said that. Before the Queen died, she put on a dinner. One of the guests was a self-made millionaire. He was a leading British shopkeeper, and he made his fortune selling oranges. And he was called in Britain the Orange King because he cornered the market selling oranges in Britain. It all started on the back streets of London. That's where he began. As a young boy, he pushed a cart of fruit through the London streets, and he sold oranges on the corner. His business expanded. He purchased a warehouse. He purchased a second warehouse. He kept expanding and growing, and he became phenomenally wealthy. Sainsbury, Britain's leading grocer, they were sort of the Costco of their day. They bought out this Orange King, and he became an instant millionaire. Nobody knows the amount. But they did have a ceremonial signing of the contract that this old boy that pushed the cart, selling it to Sainsbury. The shopkeeper, who the Queen had for dinner, he took the pen to sign his name on the contract. All he could do was put an X beside his printed name. He explained that he had never learned to write. He couldn't write. The lawyer who witnessed the signing, they said to him, "My dear fellow, have you not known that you've now become one of the richest men in Britain? And you can't even write your name. Just imagine where you'd be if you could." "Yes," said the new millionaire, "I'd still be out there pushing my cart." The press got wind of the signing, and they asked him, "What was the success, would you say, of your business, pushing a cart, selling oranges?" Here's what he told them. "What you learn on the streets of London is not all sweetness, and it's not all light. My old mom, my mother, taught me to sing when I was just a young working lad, and I sang it to myself when I was on the streets of London pushing my cart. Here's what I sang. The rain, it raineth every day, upon the just and the unjust feller, but more upon the just, because the unjust got the just's umbrella. He said he didn't learn that in the classroom, only from the lips of his humble old mother. Jesus took a risk, just like this, just like the shopkeeper, and chose Simon the Zealot. And he found a man that was daring, hardworking, had a vision, full of enthusiasm, hot-blooded, a real firebrand among the other apostles. I'll bet the other 11 looked at him and said, wow, I can't keep up with him. Is he ever different? But I really like him. He chose people, Jesus did, like you. In Matthew 10:38, Jesus said, he that takes not his cross and follows after me, then he's not worthy of me. Simon the Zealot, tradition tells us, died on a cross, crucified, just like Jesus, his boss. Isn't that an amazing story? Now, we've been studying personalities in the Bible, in their Old Testament and New Testament. I want you to come back next week. I've got another one for you. And keep coming, because you're going to enjoy these people, because what you learn from them is going to help us become who we are. See you then.